Hello and welcome to the site tour for our 2025 crowdfunded dig here on Lindisfarne. I'm Shelby and I'm really excited to be here on site today to see what the team are working on. Let's go and speak to Trench Supervisor Ben here in Trench 2 to see what's happening. Hi Ben.
Hi Shelby.
What's going on here?
We are currently stood next to our early medieval monastic vallum ditch. And what that means is this is the original boundary to the monastery when it was first established here on Holy Island. So at the minute we're excavating down to try and find the full depth and width of it, and the guys are doing a cracking job of that at the minute. We think we might be getting there, but it's a really important feature this, because this is where they originally came to establish that boundary around the monastery. We think the dating from it, the charcoal, the animal bone that's come out, is telling us that this is around about the mid-7th century, nice and contemporary with when the records tell us that the monastery was originally founded.
Yeah. Can you talk us through some more of the other structures on site here today?
Absolutely.
What are these stones all about?
For sure. So we've got a big wall here, quite wide and thick. And you'll notice that the stonework is actually sort of sinking down into the top of where I was talking about that ditch was. And that's because we think what's happened is the monastery has expanded and all of these buildings have been put on top of the old ditch. That's why they're sinking down. So big wall here. Big flagged surface behind me as well, where it's nice and flat. And then under the tarp we've got more walls, and then just behind us again even more. So nice stone built structures coming up.
So what are we looking at here then where Mary's working? Is this a drain?
It is a drain, yes. So we've got a nice stone lined channel down here, and on either side of it we've got obviously this really big slab, and you might be able to see the outline of some stone-lined boxes as well. We've got, we think, 3 of them. So we've got the one that we've excavated partially out there, the one just under Mary's hand where the slab is, and the one on the other side of Mary as well. So 3 stone-lined basins with a water channel running through the middle. So perhaps we've got some sort of small-scale craft workshopping in here where they needed water. Perhaps it was something like leather making or metal working. We're not sure yet. We're looking for more evidence of what it could be by carrying on digging down. Hopefully we get to that this week before the end.
Yeah. So obviously you're still uncovering the cemetery here, and we've had hundreds of burials over the 10 years that you've been working here at Lindisfarne. Have we found any more burials this year?
We certainly have, yes. We've got quite a few that we've been excavating, just over in the top corner of the trench. How about I hand over to Nico to tell you all about what she's found?
That'd be great. Hi Nico. How are you getting on?
Doing quite well, thank you.
What are you working on?
We are clearing out a skeleton for documentation.
How did it feel when you first noticed that what you might have on your hands is a skeleton?
It was actually pretty exciting because Becca and I have been working on this area all week, bringing it down, going through quite a lot of rubble, bone fragments of animals mostly, finding some shells. You know, all of that was very exciting for me. This is my first dig, so... I actually found the toes first, and it was interesting to see a cluster all together.
Yeah. Did you find anything else in the burial?
Other than the things I mentioned, yes, there was a point where I was carefully, once we discovered the toes, carefully moving some rocks and found something that was a little different from a normal rock, scraped it, felt a little more like a tinny sound, pulled it out, ended up being a buckle. So,
wow.
I have it here.
Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, it's quite rusted. Most likely iron, but we'll send it for testing.
Wow,
not sure
fantastic.
What it's from, but it came around just above ankle height here. So.
Yeah, so it's not likely that we're thinking that it's part of the burial?
I think grave goods were fairly rare back then, but with the placement, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Nico. We'll let you carry on because you're hard at work, and I know that you've got a lot that you want to tackle before you head off. So thank you for your time.
left.
Indeed, thank you.
Thank you.
So, This was Trench 2. It's great to see what everyone's working on. Everyone's working hard, and we've had some really, really incredible discoveries so far. That's it from Trench 2, and I'm going to move over to Trench 9 to see what their guys have got over there.
Thank you, Shelby, for that tour of Trench 2. It looks like a really beautiful day out on Lindisfarne. And welcome to the studio. I'm Maya, and here with me to discuss some of the things that we're seeing on the tour is Dr. David Petts, our co-director from Durham University. Together we're going to be offering a bit of comment on what we're seeing from the trenches and talking about the last 10 years of archaeology that we have been doing on Lindisfarne, where we have been trying to locate the iconic monastery that was famously raided by Vikings, along with the cemetery that was associated with it. So, in the trenches, Shelby has just shown us some really interesting structural remains. David, do you think we've actually found the monastery, and how can we tell?
I think we've certainly found some of the monastery. I think the key thing to remember is that the early medieval monastery on Lindisfarne was absolutely huge. It runs from the south edge of the island, goes beneath the whole village, and it actually pops up the other side. This time last year, we were excavating a cemetery right on the north side of the village. So what we're looking at is just a small part of what was once a very big site. And we're clearly quite near the heart of the monastery. We know that the later priory church, which you can see there, that was probably where Cuthbert's shrine was. So our trench is just outside that, and the structures we're finding are clearly early medieval, so they clearly date to the time of Cuthbert and the Viking attacks and the period afterwards. So they are absolutely part of that early medieval monastery, yes.
Incredible. It's such an incredible find to finally locate the monastery. But let's talk a little bit more about exactly what we've found, because in that trench we saw some what looked like some quite unusual features. There was walls, there was the vallum, but there was also a drain, a slab, and some basins. So, do we have any more thoughts on what those might actually be? And which bits of the monastery do we actually think we found, not just this year, but over the last 10 years as well?
Well, as you just said, we've got a whole series of structural remains, and I think these walls and the surfaces and the gullies, they're all part of the same kind of complex of buildings. Some of them are built in different ways. There's different styles. And one of the interesting things from my point of view is the very fact we've got big stone buildings at all, because I would have expected initially simple wooden timber like structures. So again, this is a great example of why we dig, because we're surprised and we don't always know what's going to turn up. But looking at these structures, I think the noticeable thing is we do have surfaces, we do have these gullies which are clearly meant to move water around. We've had a series of stone troughs and boxes which are, some of them are clay lined. So again, they're clearly meant to store water. So they're clearly some kind of workshop or preparation area. We've certainly, in some parts of our trench, we've had evidence for metalworking, though actually that metalworking is not in those buildings, so that it may have been taking place outside. We've had evidence for kind of blobs of molten copper and crucibles and that kind of thing. More directly associated with our structures, we've had quite a lot of animal bone coming out from these excavations. So it may be that these are some kind of food preparation area. I mean, whether it's specifically a kitchen, but certainly somewhere where animal bone seems to be being used. And one of the great things is, because we've got good bone preservation on the island, which is quite rare in this part of the country, we can see all these amazing animal bones. We've got the usual range of kind of cattle and sheep and pig, the kind of things you might expect. But also we've got all sorts of maritime resources. So we've got lots of fish bones which survive, which is really pleasing. We've got bird bones. So again, normal things like chicken and geese, but they're also eating puffins and gannets and the now extinct great auk. We've got lots of seal and whale, as well as loads and loads of shellfish. They're clearly eating an awful lot of oysters and that kind of thing. So given all all that evidence, my hunch at the moment is we're looking at some kind of food preparation area or processing area. But again, I suspect a lot of the more detailed stuff will come out in the wash when we do the post-excavation stage of the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible range of animal remains that you've just pointed out there. But it's not just about what we found, right? It's about what order they all come in. And it feels like after 10 years of digging, we're finally really starting to understand the phasing and the chronology of all of these structures, what came in what order and what that tells us about how the monastery evolved over time. I think Ben pointed out that we had the very earliest phase of the monastery, so the vallum, that was that mid 7th century boundary that they would have dug when they first came to the island to establish the monastery, and that there were then later stone buildings on top that were slumping into the vallum, suggesting that at some point the monastery expanded. So, what do you think we've really learned about the chronology of this monastery? And can you talk us through the phasing of the site as we know it at the moment?
Yeah, we've got quite a lot of time depth with this monastery. People tend to think of the early medieval monastery as just being kind of one phase, one structure, but that monastery existed for over 400 years before the Normans came along and built the later priory. So not surprisingly, it changed and evolved over that time. Our earliest feature is this great vallum ditch, which Ben talks about. So this would have been a big boundary ditch that marked the kind of the edge, the symbolic edge of the monastery. And in our case, we've already had several carbon-14 dates out from that ditch, which show clearly it's mid 7th century, which kind of matches quite nicely with the foundation of the monastery. But crucially, it's then filled in. And we've done geoarchaeological work, and it's clearly deliberately backfilled, not just silted up. And then we have this later phase, perhaps from the 8th century onwards, where we have our buildings. And again, as we've been unpicking our buildings, it's clear that there are kind of layers of structure. It's not all one plan. We've had one of the things which has come out this year is we've got what looks like earlier phases of wall starting to kind of appear. So these buildings themselves may have lasted several hundred years. They're big old substantial things. And then finally, all this is cut by our lime kiln, which we've not been looking at this year, but we've excavated in previous years. And this is a great big pit in which wood and limestone were burnt together to create the slaked lime you need to make mortar. And again, our carbon-14 dates are put it in the 11th century, late 11th century. So that must have been to do with the construction of the new priory. So everything kind of fits between our early vallum and our late lime kiln. We've also had this year and previous years a couple of scraps of Roman pottery as well popping up. And that's kind of hinting at maybe activity in the area before the Roman period. We've had one or two scattered carbon-14 dates, which are clearly predating the monastery as well. So there are also just hints that there must have been something going on there before the monastery was even established.
So that's a really long timeline we've now got for the island and for the monastery. And it shows us the full evolution from even before it was established to when it was established, and then all the way through to when they built that later priory that you can still visit today. I mean, yeah, it's an incredible piece of work, and it feels like after 10 years, the pieces of the puzzle are finally all starting to drop into place and for the story to start to begin to make sense. I think by now, though, Shelby will have made it over to Trench 9. So let's go and take a look at what's happening over there.
We're over in Trench 9, which is just south of Trench 2, where we're uncovering a number of burials that suggest we've got a continuation of the cemetery. Let's go and speak to Ventura Golferine about the burial she's working on. Hi, Golferine.
Yeah.
How are you getting on?
Good.
Yeah.
This is my third burial that I'm lifting. I've done 2 before that, and then at that point it was just very new experience for me. I've never done this before, so doing this third time is the lucky charm. So the brilliant thing about this one is that it's really nicely preserved. You can see a whole skull over there. Long bones are really nicely preserved as well. The way it's lying down, east to west presentation facing that way, it suggests that it's probably possibly one of the earlier burials. So yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
So this is your third skeleton that you've worked on, but how did it feel the very first time that you realised that you had a skeleton on your hands?
Yeah, I mean, first time is always nervous, yeah. So I was quite nervous, but I had the whole support from everyone, and they told me what to do and how to do it. Second time it became a bit more easier, and this time I'm just doing it solo.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of days left, so I won't keep you from your work.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Let's head over to Trench Supervisor Harriet to see what she's working on. Hi, Harriet.
Hi, Shelby.
So, over the last few years, we've uncovered a number of namestones here in Trench 9, including this one that you've got here.
Yeah.
Can you show us a bit more about this and explain why these finds are so distinctive for Lindisfarne?
Yeah, I certainly can. So over the last 10 years, we've uncovered dozens of namestone fragments, and this is one of the ones that we found last week in Trench 9, and this is one of the most beautiful ones, in my opinion, that we've ever found. So you can see that we have this Celtic knotwork just at the base of the cross there, and we have a really nice and clear inscription of part of a name as well. So we'll be having a specialist take a look at this, and they will be able to translate the letters that we can see here, and hopefully give us an indication of the name that belonged to this namestone and presumably to one of these burials.
Yeah. So is this the full extent of the namestone, or would there have been a larger part? Can you give us an idea of what the original shape would have been?
Yeah, certainly. So the ones that we find on Lindisfarne normally have curved tops. Now, obviously, we can't see the top of this one. We've only got a lower quadrant of it. So if you imagine that this is about a quarter of it, we can tell that because we know that they normally have a cross, like a Christian cross that comes up. So we can just see that lower quarter. So it would have been about twice the size and probably about twice the height. So you're looking at something like a hardback book kind of shape and size. And interestingly, this one is quite thick as well. Often these are much thinner, but this one is really quite chunky and it's got a good weight to it.
Thank you, Harriet. That's really exciting. And obviously, I can't help but notice that that's not the only exciting find here in Trench 9. There's a massive wall along here. What can you tell us about the wall, and what does it mean for the trench and the wider site picture?
Yeah, we have a really big wall that is coming through and cutting the trench kind of in half. It's almost in half. And we think that this is the latest event to have happened in our trench. So everything that we've been finding on top of and up against the wall has been like 12th, 13th century. So we're getting green glazed pottery. It's that kind of high medieval period. We think that this wall represents a boundary between the cemetery, the graveyard that we have here in the north half of this trench and all the way across the north of the field, because we don't have any burials so far coming up on the south side of this wall. And we've gone down pretty deep in some areas and haven't had any bones, any human bones anyway, coming up just yet. So we're really excited that this might finally show us where the boundary to this cemetery was, because no matter where we've put trenches in this field in the past, we've always found burials. So to have a quite substantial area where we haven't found human remains yet is really, really significant for our analysis.
Thank you, Harriet. That's really exciting. Thank you so much for sharing your insights about Trench 9. I will let you carry on with your work, as I know that we've got a lot to do and just a few more days to do it. So I shall take my leave.
Thank you.
So we can't finish this site tour without taking a moment to thank all of our crowdfunders, not just from this year, but from the past 10 years that we've been working on Lindisfarne. It literally would not be possible without your generous support. Stay tuned to find out more about how you can get involved in the next chapter of Lindisfarne's story.
And thanks again to Shelby and Harriet and Golfarine for showing us around Trench 9. once again, there's a lot for us to talk about here and to unpick in a bit more detail. But before we delve into it, just a reminder to anyone watching live that we will be doing a Q&A at the end of this segment. So please drop any questions you've got for us or about the site or about what we've found in the last 10 years into the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. But David, first question then about what we've just seen in Trench 9. What is the significance of finding the wall and the edge of the cemetery?
Well, as Harriet says, in that field, which is the main field we've been excavating, is the one thing that's kind of linked nearly all the trenches we've opened is huge numbers of burials, and there must be thousands of burials in that field. So we've been trying to kind of get a better sense of the nature of that cemetery, and we need to work out some of the basics. Just how far does it go? As I said right at the beginning, we're looking at a really big site here. We can just peering at it through fairly small trenches. So being able to work out where the edges of things like the cemetery are is really important to help us kind of build a picture of how space is being used within that monastery. So yeah, we've now got a southern edge. I think in our trench, our northern trench 11, we've probably found the edge on the northern side. We know where the eastern edge is because not far off from our trenches, it would have been open water. So really, we've kind of worked out at least 3 edges of the cemetery. So that's really important for helping us just to kind of work out the plan of the bigger monastery and how space is being used across this amazing site.
I mean, as you say, it's an absolutely vast cemetery. It extends all the way to the water's edge, almost from one end of the field to the other. And I guess that gives us, an indication of how busy the monastery was and how many people were buried here over time and the size of the population that came and went here. I think so far we've identified over 100 burials just within the trenches that we've excavated, and that's got to be just a tiny portion of the cemetery as a whole. But I think what's starting to come out from looking at these burials is that we've actually got quite a diverse range. There's a lot of simple shroud burials. That's how the majority of people are buried. But then there are some that seem to have a special status. There's something that marks them out. Maybe they're lined with stone or something like that. And then the people that we find within them are quite diverse as well. We've got men, women, and children. And we've got quite a range of interesting examples as well. We've got at least one person who has some sharp force injuries to the head and torso. We've got a woman who's lived well into old age, and then we've got another woman who seems to have been some sort of holy figure as well, surrounded by child burials. So what do you think these burials are adding to our understanding at the moment? And most importantly, who do we think they might be? Who was buried here? Where were they coming from? Who were they?
Yeah, I mean, this cemetery is all part of the story of the monastery, because these people are clearly being deliberately buried as close as possible to the shrine of Cuthbert. They're all there for a reason. What's clear is, as you said, that these aren't the burials of the monks. Bede writes very clearly that there's a separate cemetery for the monks. But instead, we've clearly got, as you said, we've got everything from the very young to the very old, we've got men and women. So it's clearly a different kind of community. And what we're trying to do at the moment, and as we move forward, is going to be get a better sense of who these people are. We've got a number of hypotheses. These could be just the island community, the people who live on the island alongside the monks, perhaps working on monastic land, helping the monks with their day-to-day lives. Or they could be pilgrims, people who've come to the island either for healing or simply to be buried close to Cuthbert. Or it could be a mix of both. And these are kind of all the kind of questions we're going to be asking as we move forward. And I think we're going to talk a little bit later about our future plans. But it's looking at these kind of burials, doing the ad hoc analysis as we go, that allows us to build these questions. And it's going to be these questions which are going to inform us as we move forward.
And it's something that can give us quite a different perspective on a story that people seem to think is relatively well known. We know that story of the Vikings, the monks, the bishops, and the kings, but perhaps what is less well known is all the other people that were living here. And so this excavation and finding some of these burials gives us a chance to add that new perspective to quite a well-known story. But I think it was really fascinating as well that Harriet showed us one of the namestones that has been discovered in the last few days. Over the last 10 years, how many have we found and what do they tell us? And also, to anyone watching live or at home, can you tell what the latest one we found says? Can you read the name on the latest one we've found?
Right. Here you see, this is one which came from one of our trenches, the trench we've just been looking at from about a week ago, and I can't read that. I'm going to put my hands up and say at the moment I can't get a reading for that, but we're going to work with the leading professionals, the leading experts in looking at Anglo-Saxon inscriptions. But we have been able to get readings from other namestones, and these namestones are all quite consistent. They always have Anglo-Saxon names, sometimes written in Roman script, sometimes also written in runes. And names include Cuthwolf, Ithfrith, which is actually from our very first namestone. And Ithfrith is particularly exciting because it's one of the first ever, well, it's not one of, it is the first ever record of that particular name. So we've done some archaeology of names there. We discovered a new Anglo-Saxon name. But these are really nice because they help us turn these skeletons into real people. We know we're starting to be able to kind of give them names, understand who they are. But we can combine that with the analysis of the bones themselves, because we can almost tell people's life stories through their bones. As you said, we can see when people have been ill, we can see when people have been malnourished, we can see some diseases, we can see injuries that have healed, we can see injuries that have killed people. So we're starting to be able to almost kind of write little biographies of some of the people who were living in Lindisfarne. And it's the people that make the monastery, because I think we need to remember that in this period, in the early Middle Ages, particularly north of York, the places like Lindisfarne were the biggest population centres. These weren't remote, isolated locations with a small number of monks. These are busy, bustling, centralised places with lots of people coming and going. And looking at these burials, we're seeing people in death, but also we can start asking questions about what they were like and what they were doing in life as well.
Absolutely. And you can also see, there's glimpses on them as well of the artwork that was on them. And I think, alongside some of the other discoveries we've made, that starts to show us the kind of artwork, the stylistic interpretations that people were applying to things like namestones, but to other sculptures as well. So I wonder if we can just quickly take a look at some of the other artifacts that we found over the last few years and have a quick chat through some of the key ones that we've got. I mean, we've got on there Uthris namestone in the top right, and just to the bottom of it, below and to the left, we've also got that really wonderful cross stone that we found a few years ago in two halves. And I can remember the moment that they were reunited when we realised that there were two halves that fitted back together. But it's things like this, the sculpture, what can that tell us?
I mean, this kind of sculpture is really kind of typical of the early medieval church, particularly the Northumbrian church. And whilst the namestones are probably grave markers, things like the crosses, they would have kind of punctuated the landscape of the monastery. They would have acted as focuses of prayer and devotion. They would have marked important entrances and had that kind of symbolic role of marking the move into increasingly holy space. They probably would have been used to kind of punctuate the processions which the monks would have taken around the monastery. So they're all part of the way in which the monks, through burials, but also through building churches and putting up monuments, were kind of turning a settlement into a religious place and a religious experience. And things like that cross stone there is particularly nice because there are no parallels for anything like that in Northumberland or County Durham, and actually the nearest parallel is all the way from Galloway in far southwest Scotland. So it shows how monasteries, because the other one was found in a monastery too, were kind of held together. These things are almost being used like logos or branding, linking together monasteries which are a part of the same kind of cultural world. So it's fantastic stuff, and we've got some which are really quite artistically elaborate. It tells us we've got monasteries like Lindisfarne are places where there are skilled craftsmen capable of making some really interesting pieces of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's famous for producing things like the Lindisfarne Gospels, which is probably one of the most incredible and beautiful pieces of artwork from the period that was produced here. But I think one of the things that I'm absolutely loving the most about the excavations over the last 10 years has been that, it's showing us things at a massive scale. So we've got, the layout of the monastery itself. We're starting to see the buildings, the cemetery, the routes that you were just talking about, the statues that might have punctuated part of the cemetery, and also how that links to other monasteries across the UK and even into the wider world. But then there's also things among those finds that give us a really detailed perspective. And I think one of the ones that really fascinates me, that we were just looking at, are those fish bones. Can you tell us a little bit about that series of fish bones that we saw on the slide just now?
Yeah, so the fish bones, they're on the bottom left, and they don't look much, but these are the vertebrae from a fish like a salmon. Now these vertebrae naturally have holes in them, but our eagle-eyed fishbone specialists noticed that the bones for these were actually had been expanded, and they're all found together. And we are fairly sure that what we've got here is a selection of beads, all from one necklace, and they would have been this would have been worn or carried by one of our people. And it's quite unusual to find grave goods in our cemetery. And our current working hypothesis, and it's something which might change in future, is that these were probably a set of prayer beads. We certainly know that in Europe, fish vertebrae were used for prayer beads and rosaries at a later date. That we've got what looks like quite a precociously early example of this. So as I said, further analysis might change that story, and that's why we're only really kind of just beginning to get a better understanding of the site. But yeah, that's a lovely little example of something which isn't expensive, isn't elaborate, isn't particularly artistically complex, but just gives a lovely little insight into the daily life and religious life of somebody at the monastery.
Yeah, there's some truly lovely little aspects of daily life in there, isn't there? So we've got the prayer beads. There was also the gaming piece that we've spoken about extensively previously. So we've got religious life, we've got leisure time, and then we've even got things like a piece of bone comb that tells us perhaps about how people were, their hygiene, their looking after themselves, their whether they're combing their hair or their beard or whatever. And one of the things I love about that piece as well is that someone's carved their name on it to say almost like, this is mine. So yeah, some really, really lovely things in there. And I think, again, the white quartz pebbles, again, which we've talked about previously in the past, that's a lot of the burials that we've seen so far have been lined with those white quartz pebbles. And that's revealed, a mortuary or burial practice that, again, we haven't seen in the written record. We only know about that through excavation and from discovering them on this site, as well as some other similar sites of the same period as well. So it just goes to show what archaeology can really add once again to what we generally assume is quite a well-known story, but actually the closer that we look at it, the more there is to find out. But I think the next thing to say really is that the end of the dig isn't the end of the archaeology. It is the start of a whole new chapter. And David, as you were saying, it's sometimes only really when we look at things very closely in the lab that we realise exactly what they are and what they have got to offer the story as well, like those fish bones. So we now have over 10 years worth of discoveries, some incredible artifacts, including actually over 600 special or registered finds, as well as thousands of bulk finds, including all of the animal bone that David mentioned earlier. We've got 100 plus burials, we've got environmental samples, we've got structural remains, samples for radiocarbon dating, gosh, and so much more. And now it's time to start analysing them in detail. Most of them have been assessed and we've written yearly reports on them, but it's now time to start looking at them in detail as an entire and complete collection. And obviously we will, as always, be creating as many opportunities for people to be involved in this work along the way as possible. And actually our first step is going to be analysing all of the human remains. So in 2026, people are going to be able to join our osteologists either online or in the lab at Durham University as we begin to examine the remains. And together we can work together to unpick more stories about the people who were living on Lindisfarne. David, can you tell us a little bit more again about what we're hoping to learn from all of this and what people who are supporting this next stage of the journey, what they will be helping us to achieve?
Well, yeah, as we said repeatedly, the getting things out of the ground is only the first part of the story. Nowadays, particularly archaeology, we have so many scientific techniques. There's so many ways of analyzing this material. We can really drill down. So with human remains, we've always been able to look at them and see whether they're male or female, or see whether how old they are. We can tell the difference between a kind of a baby from an old person. But nowadays we've got lots of more techniques. We can extract DNA from our bones. We can see whether they're related or not related. We can look at the chemistry of the bones and the teeth, and that can tell us about things like diet. It can tell us how much meat and fish and plant matter people are eating. We can see whether people are actually moving around. We can see whether the people in our graveyard are kind of born near where they've been buried, or whether they've come from elsewhere. We've taken hundreds of samples of soil which we can wet sieve and find evidence for plant remains. We can find evidence for parasite eggs from people's bodies. Nowadays, we can even use techniques to look at the plaque on people's teeth to see what they might have been eating and diseases they might have. And in fact, one of the challenges we've been having is that there's techniques which we can now use which didn't even exist when the project started, and so the technology is moving on so quickly. We're kind of constantly racing to keep up. So obviously that it's going to be this really fine-grained, detailed, close analysis of all our amazing assemblages that are going to be really important to kind of help us better understand what we've got. And the excavation stage is very much just the first part of a much bigger project.
Absolutely. And I think, again, one of the things that I love most about it all is that, what we learn is going to help reshape the narrative. It's going to shift the emphasis of Lindisfarne's story from being about, Vikings and destruction and abandonment to one that is much more about, the core of the community who were there, the people at the heart of the story, to us, a story of survival and continuity. And yeah, the people at the heart of the island. And once we've done that, once we've worked our way through the human remains, there's going to be much, much more to do as well. There's analysing all of the artefacts, the environmental remains. And obviously we're going to be hoping to weave this all together to reconstruct a much richer version of the story and find exciting new ways to share it with the world, whether that is through visualizations, whether it's books, talks, virtual museums, documentaries, podcasts, and more. These stories, we will get them out there. And that is what all of the people that have been involved in the project so far and who will continue to be involved in the project over the next few years will be helping us to do. But David, I've got one last question for you. There's lots of questions that we've started to answer about, the layout of the monastery, the people that were here, the kinds of things, the details of their daily lives. But what is ultimately the biggest question that you'd still like to answer? Like, what is the crux of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's not necessarily about kind of fancy sculpture or beautiful metalwork. As an archaeologist, I'm just really keen to get a really detailed understanding of the chronology of the site, because as I said, one of the things we've shown is that we've actually got occupation at the cemetery, occupation at the monastery after everyone's traditionally meant to have left. But I'd really want to kind of hone that down, and we can use carbon-14 dates and other techniques to really get a much more fine-grained understanding of the chronology. And it's a bit geeky, I know, but that's the kind of thing which I'm particularly interested in, to really get a sense of how our monasteries changed and evolved over time.
Well, I'm really, really looking forward to it. If there are any questions from people watching live, do drop them into the chat and we will answer them now. I think we've got one really big question that's worth answering, which is, what has it meant to the project to have so many people from all over the world to be involved?
At a basic level, this project would not have happened without all the people who've been involved. They've been kind of fundamental to the whole, getting the whole thing up and running. So the kind of involvement from Venturers and others, it's not a nice to have thing. It's a thing which is absolutely fundamental to the underlying project. So and it's been nice just to see how far people have come. You heard the range of accents on our films earlier on. We have people from New Zealand, from Australia, and that kind of identification people have with Lindisfarne. It's such an important site for people, and we've seen people come back again year after year. I think once the Lindisfarne says Holy Island is a magic place, and then once people kind of come once, they get drawn back. And we've built up this real community of people on site and kind of online virtually as well, which has made this project such a joy to be involved with, frankly.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I mean, the energy that people have brought to the dig, and as well, the personal lived experience that people come at us with, interesting questions that keep us on our toes and constantly rethinking what it is that we're doing, what we're trying to find out, and why. But also, there's been people from all sorts of backgrounds involved, from nurses and drivers to surgeons and lawyers and masons and potters, and everyone brings something with them, as well as their enthusiasm for unearthing the past, something that contributes to how we think and talk about the dig as well, which is something I find really fantastic, and keeps us thoughtful about what we're doing and the questions that we're asking. We've got a question from Doug, who has picked up on the fact that we have focused on 2 of the trenches. There was actually a third, Trench 11, very close to the pub. Do we have any updates about what is happening in Trench 11 at the moment?
Yeah, so Trench 11, I mentioned it briefly when I was talking earlier on. This is a trench right in the north of our field, and we put that there originally to, try and find the edge of our cemetery. And so far, touch wood, we've had no graves popping up in there. Another thing we're trying to do with that trench is also see whether we can find the line of our big monastic ditch, because again, we're trying to work out, get a better understanding of the plan of the monastery. But so far, we've had lots of later medieval archaeology. We've had what looks like either kind of surfaces and structures, and these are all part of the story of kind of Lindisfarne, Holy Island in the 13th and 14th century. So at the moment, we haven't got down into really the early medieval areas, but again, that story of a coastal village in the late Middle Ages is really, really exciting. We've got loads of animal bone, loads of fish bone, loads of shellfish. So again, that future analysis is going to really help us understand aspects of daily life. So yeah, it's still an important part of the story.
I think there's going to be lots of surprises coming out, and I think we've only got a couple more days left on site. So on that note, I think we shall let Shelby and everyone get back to the trenches to complete the dig. And for now, we just want to say thank you to everyone who is currently involved in the dig or has been involved in the past. Like David says, it is thanks to you that this dig has been possible, and that we will continue to be able to delve into the discoveries that we've made and continue to do really groundbreaking work that will change the narrative around one of the most iconic sites in British or in English history. And really, really looking forward to the next few years where we take all of the discoveries back to the lab and keep everyone involved in the work, because it isn't just about digging, it is about taking a really good close-up look at all of the discoveries and seeing what else they can tell us. So on that note, if you'd like to find out more about getting involved in the next stage of analysis, you can get involved with our osteology team. So if you'd like to scan the QR code or head to digventures.com/projects, you can take a look at how you can get involved in 2026. Or if you want to hear more about future opportunities, sign up to our newsletter and we will send you alerts. And if you want to support our work on an ongoing basis over the winter, you can also become a subscriber for extra behind the scenes updates. So once again, thank you to everyone who has been involved and who continues to be involved. And thank you to David and to everyone at Durham University for what has been an incredible partnership and will continue to be an incredible partnership over the next few years. And I cannot wait to see what stories and what discoveries come out of what's about to happen next. So we'll see you all again soon. And for now, a big friendly goodbye. It's archaeology in your hands.